Salve Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard that it was said to your ancestors, you shall not kill, and whoever kills will be liable for judgment. But I say to you, whoever is angry with brother will be liable to judgment. You have heard that it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Again, you have heard it said to your ancestors, do not take a false oath, but make good to the Lord all that you vow. But I say to you, do not swear at all. Let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more is from the evil one. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So today in our first reading, Sirach reminds us that our life is built on our choices. The Lord created us as free beings, and with freedom comes responsibility. Sirach doesn't just remind us today that we're free to choose. He encourages us to make the right choices. The 10 Commandments reflect God's wisdom, and that makes them good choices for us. We have to trust in God in making His choices our choice. St. Paul tells us that our choices should be done not out of obligation, but out of love. They have to be choices from the heart, or they'll never reach their full potential. The world today has a slanted wisdom to it. The surface just has to be scratched to realize how superficial that it is. And sometimes scratching below the surface reveals it to be reckless. Wisdom is not an accumulation of information, but it is an insight into the big picture of life. God not only knows the big picture, He painted it, and He unveils it to us little by little if we pay attention and seek to learn. We have been created by God out of love, and all He wants in return from us is our love. He wants it, but love is incredible in that you can't make someone love you. It is the greatest and the freest choice that we can make. Just a hint of coercion, and it's not love at all. In our gospel today, Jesus teaches us that all the commandments have a purpose, and they reflect a wisdom that can shape our lives for the better if only we choose to observe them from our heart. He is also calling out those who observe the commandments superficially and without heart. God doesn't do anything pointless. Everything is part of His loving plan for us. Jesus tells us today He hasn't come to discard the old, but rather He puts the old covenant's purpose into context. In His own words, He does not come to abolish, but to fulfill. I can remember my 4 children as they were growing up in my house. We had rules that they had to follow. There were some that were obvious. They had to keep their rooms clean. That always didn't work as well as we hoped. And another one was for them to clean the common areas in the house. They had to go to school. They had to do their homework. We told them that we would all go to church on Sundays as a family. We would pray before meals and before they would go to bed. Another major rule was that they had to get along with each other and be respectful to each other. And above all, keep your hands to yourself. For all you parents out there, you might know that these were probably the hardest of them all. I don't know how many times on the trips in the minivan or from the living room did we hear, "Dad, he or she won't leave me alone. They keep on hitting me." So me, in my best dad voice, would say, "Hey, knock it off." But after a period of time, we would hear, "I'm not touching you." And as the offender taunted their sibling, they weren't keeping the letter of the law. They were sticking to the letter of the law that we had set down. Sure, they weren't physically hurting or injuring or touching their brother and sister, but they were antagonizing them. And that wasn't the right thing to do either. So this morning, ladies and gentlemen, the story you just heard is true, but the names were omitted to protect the Father. In our gospel today, Jesus is inviting us to go deeper beyond the letter of the law. The law that God has given us is not to be oppressive, but they are something to rejoice in because it should enable us to live a better life in Jesus. These good laws enable us to flourish and prohibit any activity that can diminish our human condition. Jesus in our gospel today is showing us that the law provides a great blueprint for a way of being fully and genuinely alive. This is what living freely out of love truly means, rather than obligations. The Catechism of our church unpacks all the moral implications of each of the 10 commandments. We can simply choose a commandment and the one that interests you the most to study it and pray about it to unpack its wisdom. Today we hear a common reference to our watered-down ethics and saying, "Hey, at least I'm not killing anyone." Our Lord reminds us that not killing anyone is good, but we had to go way beyond. In our violent world, sometimes we look the other way in the face of the lack of kindness. But our Lord reminds us today to not only not kill someone, but to be kind to them, to love our neighbor as ourselves. When tempers flare, things are said, the best thing to do, as our Lord teaches us, is to try to make amends as soon as possible, to simply apologize. A few weeks ago, there was a lot of buzz about the Super Bowl halftime show. Some felt that the performers and the production were too provocative, while others loved the show and the energy and called it historic because the star performers were of Latin heritage. Jesus teaches us today that chastity starts in our heart, and we need to be respectful of our bodies and others around us. A highly sexualized culture should not provoke our surrender, but our vigilance. The key to living a chastity in of our hearts is to remember that the person in front of you was created in the image and likeness of God, and they deserve our respect and love, not lust, not selfishness. We need to look at them as a person who deserves the same self-esteem and respect we expect for ourselves. Our Lord reminds us that making a promise or giving testimony is a powerful thing. When something is simple as a yes or no, there is no room for spin, no room for arguing, for fine print, or for establishing a little gray area in our conscience. We need to ask our Lord to help us to understand the purpose of the traditions as we live as Christians, the life, our faith more fully, and not to be quick to discard them as pointless. We receive strength to help us grow in holiness through the sacrament of the Eucharist. When we truly allow Jesus, his very body, blood, soul, and divinity, to enter into our own body, our hearts are fortified by his graces. We always have to own up to what we have done also and what we have failed to do. The church gives us this opportunity at every Mass through the penitential rite. The priest invites everyone present to acknowledge their sins in order to prepare themselves for the Mass. Throughout our lives, we don't stop becoming sinners. The battle against temptation and sin will be waged until the day we die. And there will be times that we do fall, the times we don't follow his laws. He has given us his great mercy through the sacrament of reconciliation, in which God's love for us manifests itself in the most dramatic way. All we need to do is ask for this. The simplest way to be genuine, our Lord reminds us today, is simply to be sincere. It's the simplicity of a yes or a no to life, one that leaves no room for deceiving ourselves or others. What is God calling for us to do today? Our choices shape us, but after making them, we don't always take stock of whether they were good choices. Sometimes we realize in retrospect what a good or bad choice we have made. We need to take a moment this morning in prayer and examine how our life was shaped by a decision you made or you avoided. Don't just weigh its merits on its own. Examine it with our Lord. We can't undo our choices in life, but we can learn from them.
Regina Celi, letare, alleluia, qui aquam meruisti portare, alleluia, resurrexit sicut dixit,